My name is Amani Sherman, and today I'm going to talk about our paper entitled, "Are You Going to Answer That? Measuring User Responses to Anti-Robocall Application Indicators." Robocalls can be annoying and costly. UMail, an anti-robocall company, estimated that about 4.7 billion robocalls were sent to U.S. numbers in January of 2020. That's about 14 robocalls per person. And we have to deal with scams like the tech support scam, the callback scam, the social security scam, which is when they call you saying your social security number was expired. Like I said, robocalls can be annoying and costly. So how are robocalls made? Well, of course, we have auto dialers, which allow you to make multiple calls at once. But we really need to talk about VoIP and authentication. Now, of course, VoIP is the voice over internet protocol, which allows you to make calls over the internet. But what we see here is that when you use VoIP, it makes it a lot easier and cheaper to make all of those calls. Also, the lack of authentication over our telecommunication systems makes it a lot easier to spoof calls. Now, of course, you may have heard of Stir Shaken, which is a provider-based solution to robocalls. However, this is limited. It really only works over VoIP, and it has other limitations, and it hasn't been rolled out globally. So right now, users are relying on mobile apps. Now, mobile apps use caller ID and blacklisting to let users know when they've received a robocall. Now, there's already research done on caller ID and blacklisting, so for the purpose of our research, we actually focus on the warning designs that are used to alert users of an incoming call. So why did we look at warning designs? Well, let's take a look at the research for browsers. Researchers have found that the warning designs that are used to alert users when they're on a website that isn't secure, that they actually help to influence user decision-making. We also want to look at warning designs because not only do they help to influence user decision-making, but they help to inform them. So that way we're not forcing the users to do a certain thing or another, but we are allowing them to be informed so they can make their own decision. Now, the space that we're working in with robocalls is unique. When you look at browsers, a lot of times you're looking at a bigger screen, and you have a lot more time to actually look at the warning that's being presented. However, when you're looking at your phone and you receive a call, you have about 30 seconds to make your decision. Additionally, you're looking at a smaller screen. So those warning designs have to be effective in a smaller screen size and in a smaller amount of time. So the goal of this work is to identify trends in current anti-robocall applications for their warning designs, determine user preference, and also test and evaluate these warning designs. Now, this work is not only about declining spam calls, but also about answering legitimate calls. So we want to just inform the user of when they should or shouldn't answer a phone call. So for the remaining of this talk, I'm going to talk about the 3 studies that we did in order to reach our 3 goals. So the first study was a survey of anti-robocall applications. The second was our user experience collection, which is where we did focus groups and interviews. And our third was our warning design user study. And that was when we tested all of the warning designs that we collected, and we wanted to see how users would actually react to them. So our survey of anti-robocall applications was done to collect the current trends in robocall warning design. So to do this, we collected 10 anti-robocall apps from the Google Play Store. We searched for the term spam call blocker. We wanted to make sure that these apps are also free and that they weren't affiliated with any telephone carrier. Now, here are the 10 apps that we reviewed. And what we really want to point out here is that 3 of the apps, Call App, Hiya, and Truecaller, have over 100 million installs. Now, this is important because it lets us know that users really want this functionality. They really do want to know when they should or shouldn't answer a call. So after we gathered these 10 apps, we then evaluated their warning designs against Wohlgarter's design guidelines, and this has been used in other research. So we look at things like the wording that is used in the warning, the layout and placement of the warning. And we also look at pictorial symbols. So let's take a peek into what some of the symbols that we saw for our study. So here in Mr. Number, you can see that they use an exclamation point, and of course you can see that, okay, that means that I'm being warned of something. Here's where I should look. But we also saw this devil with a circle around it, and that can mean that something is, scary or that I should be warned, right? The next thing that we saw was a shield. Now this can be a little bit confusing, but I can see what they wanted to convey. You're being protected from a robocall, okay? But this third one was an angry octopus, and I'm really not sure how they got to that. But overall, for the 10 apps that we looked at, they all pretty much met these design guidelines. But the trend that we saw was that they kind of looked like Mr. Number with this red rectangle in the middle with some information. So next, we did our user experience collection. Now, this is where we conducted 6 60-minute focus groups and 3 60-minute interviews. We had 18 participants, and we asked them about how they handled robocalls, their notification preferences, and their desired anti-robocall functionality. Now, for this talk, I'm just going to focus on their notification preferences. So our users first said that they really wanted background color, and they wanted something that was different from what you would normally see on a phone. So for a good call, they really wanted to see either blue or green, and then for a spam call, they wanted to see yellow, orange, or red. Now, the interesting thing about this is that when we talk about the color red, some people really like the idea, but others thought that, hey, if I see this red color, I'm probably going to uninstall the app, because I'm going to think that there's a virus on my phone. And so we made sure we took that into consideration. We also looked at icons, so we looked at locks, and it turns out locks are confusing. People really didn't know what a closed lock or an open lock meant. We also looked at emojis, and people felt like emojis were really unprofessional, but they also evoked emotion for different types of calls. Now, we also looked at the X mark and check mark, and those did really well. Everyone who saw those was actually able to interpret what the X mark and check mark meant. But lastly, users said they want an authenticated caller ID. Now, they didn't actually use the phrase authenticated caller ID, but they let us know that they really wanted to know when they should or shouldn't answer a call. They wanted to know when they were receiving legitimate calls. So once we did our focus groups, and we looked at the current trends and apps that are available, we then did our warning design user study. So what we did was we put to the test what we've already found. So we had 34 participants between the ages of 20 and 32, and none of these participants were in our focus group. And we conducted a survey. So in the survey, they saw 5 warning designs and 6 phone numbers. And so they would see these in combination with one another. And they did this survey on their phone. So what they would do is they would receive these mock phone calls, and they would have to either determine if they wanted to answer or decline that call. And they did that in real time. So for the warning designs that they saw, they first saw control, and this is what it would look like if you didn't have any type of app on your phone. They then saw Avail CID, and this just represents what you would currently see if you downloaded one of those anti-robocall applications. And this just indicates that the call that you were receiving was not identified as a potential spam or robocall type of call. They also saw this Avail spam design. And this represents when you would receive a call that was potentially spam. Now, we didn't actually replicate a particular app for these last 2 designs. What we did was we looked to see what was the popular characteristics in the warning designs, and we put them together to create this. They also saw Focus Aid, and this was inspired by our focus groups. So you see it has this blue gradient in the background, it has the check mark, but it also says call authenticated right there on the warning. And then we showed them focus spam, and this was the last design that they saw, and this has the yellow to orange gradient, it has the cross mark on it, and it says potential spam. And this was also inspired by our focus groups. So then they saw 6 numbers. So at the beginning of every survey, we asked our participants to provide us with 2 numbers from contacts that they normally communicate with. And we did this because we wanted to make sure that they saw some numbers that they were familiar with, so that way we could also spoof those calls. The remaining 4 numbers are numbers that our focus group said that they would receive as spam calls. So as you see for M4, that was when a participant would receive a number that was similar to their own. Now for our results. So we assessed how warning design, phone number, and warning design plus phone number impacted the participant response. And we calculated participant response by the average number of times a participant answered a call. So our first research question was, do robocall warnings affect users' response to incoming calls from unknown numbers? And the answer to that is yes, they do. The percent of answered calls when there was no warning design from when they didn't see any warning was 35%. So when they received a call from an unknown number, we saw 35% of those calls being answered. However, we saw a decrease when that number was presented along with the warning that said that it was potentially spam, and then it increased when it was associated with authenticated caller ID. Our second question was, do robocall warnings affect users' response to incoming calls from known numbers? Yes. So of course, 100% of the time, they are answering these calls from numbers that they know. And just to reiterate, these known numbers are numbers that our participants gave to us. So these are numbers from people who they normally would contact. Now, when these numbers showed up with a spam warning, that decreased the number of times that the participant actually answered those calls. And our last question was, will the available and focused designs have significantly different effects on user response? And the answer to this was yes, but for known numbers. What we saw was that both the focused spam and the available spam helped to decrease the number of spoofed calls that participants answered. However, the avail spam was more effective. So what did we learn from all of this? What can we actually take away? So our first takeaway is that users were more likely to answer calls from unknown numbers accompanied with authenticated caller ID. Now this is important because our users from our focus group said that they wanted authenticated caller ID. And then our user study showed that this worked. So what we know is that users want to know when they should answer a call, and they want that authenticated caller ID to let them know. Second takeaway, users were less likely to answer calls from known numbers accompanied by a spam warning. Now this just lets us know that the use of spam warnings helps us to decrease the amount of victims of spoofed calls. And our third takeaway is that warning designs work, but they aren't perfect. Now, we know we can't influence users to do exactly what we want them to do 100% of the time. But due to the impact that robocalls have on our daily life, we should start trying to solve this problem from different angles, which includes looking at warning designs, which help to let users know when they should or shouldn't answer a call. Thank you.
Questions? So I have a quick question. So you mentioned in the beginning about the background color. I'm curious, like, which color actually, is preferred?
So, so people didn't prefer red, but what we think happened in this case was that when we did our focus groups, users actually had a lot more time to look at these designs. And so what we saw was that in our actual study, red performs a lot better than that yellow to orange gradient. So we think that red might actually be better. Now, of course, we weren't able to test that, and this was just really more preliminary work to kind of get this field open, but we will be doing more testing to figure out what background color actually works best.
I guess I have another quick question. So in the end, you mentioned authenticated caller ID is the #1 thing. So why can't we just build something that's really, really good and can authenticate caller IDs?
So there are already solutions out there for authenticated caller ID. The thing that we need to do now is get providers to actually roll these things out. So I talked about stir shaking a little bit earlier, and that actually is starting to roll out. So if you're a T-Mobile user, you're probably already using stir shaking, but there's a lot of rules and regulations that go with it. So the FCC has actually they opened up the floor for like comments to actually talk about how they're going to roll this out. And a big part of the problem is first you have providers who may not actually have the capability to roll this out, so they need more time to configure their network. But we also have the issue of, are we going to warn users, or are we just going to block the calls? And if we just block the calls, what does that mean? Is the user still going to see that they received that call, or are we going to just block it on our end? So there's a lot of other things that go into that.
So I just have one question. You were saying that this is like a project that's going to open up the field, and I noticed like the apps that you mentioned. A lot of people download these things, and many of them are across countries. Like Truecaller, for example, works in like million different countries. I don't know. So are you going to look at differences in like cultural differences between different countries and how they perceive these like intrusive robocall warnings?
So I think that's an interesting question. That's something that we can definitely look at. I will say that in our focus groups, we have people from different areas, and they all did seem to have different opinions about how those apps work. So that's something that we could focus on. So thank you.
All right, let's thank our speaker again.